All right. Hi, ladies. Welcome to our fifth installment of Are You Aware podcast. I'm here with Angel Prater, Dr. Dean Gray, and my name is Fawn Preston. How's it going?
Hey, it's
Hi.
going.
Welcome.
Yeah, nice seeing you both.
Yeah, you too. Today we are talking about harm reduction,
Ooh.
which is exciting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whose life is it anyway?
Right.
So Christine actually was the one who said that, a couple of weeks ago when we were planning this podcast. And I was like, yeah, seriously, like whose life is it anyways?
Mhm.
So, I would love for us to be able to talk about that. We're going to do a aware highlight first because that's usually what we do.
Mhm.
Do you want to take care of that today, Angel?
Sure. Well, we were wrestling around trying to think of like how to bring the message home around harm reduction. And I think people are actually probably aren't aware of how many amazing organizations there are and individuals there are out in our country, in the United States, that are really pushing forth the harm reduction way of thinking and philosophy and being with and representing. Well, actually pushing up against the norm, right? Or the dominant popular
Yeah.
belief system
The medical
around
model, the moral model, all of it.
Exactly. So we just talked about really honoring and naming like, hey, there's a lot of you out there, and we want to thank you for really being at the trenches, really on the streets, in the clinics. In administration, really pushing forth to normalize or also maybe that's not the word, Christine, normalize or promote or support this other way that should be kind of a front door entry rather than a second thought.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yes. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I really am very excited about this discussion we're having and that we're going to have here today. Yes, I think we should talk more about harm reduction as an approach to mental wellness and safety for everybody in the community, including people who use drugs. And I think it is. It should be the gold standard. It should be the gold standard, not without controversy, of course.
Absolutely.
Because people have, like with everything, people bring their own beliefs to the table, and we have a limited amount of resources, and what are we going to do with them?
Yeah.
Always becomes the topic of contention, but I think it has demonstrated actually some very good outcomes in the medical model and some cost savings.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I just kind of
And
wanted to
some
address
life
that
savings.
too.
Life savings.
Yeah, life
Life
savings.
saved.
Yeah.
Life saved.
Well, and just I'm glad that you brought up the fact that it might be an unpopular belief at some point, because I think that that's something that we're going to find with all of our podcasts because we're a little bit out there and, we do a lot of research, regarding alternative methods, to recovery. And so, I'm sure we're probably going to get a little bit of flack sometimes for people who don't necessarily believe like we believe, and that's okay.
Yes.
That's why it's our podcast and it's our opinions, and we're bringing them to the table and they can make their own decisions.
And I
from
think
there.
that there's a lot of people out there that do believe this.
Agreed,
and
100%.
are afraid to talk about it because of this dominant culture that, I'll just say, the abstinence model is not the only model. But for decades and decades, it has been very useful for many, but so many have been dying and so many have don't fit in that box. And so when you're brought up, in your own wellness journey, recovery, whatever you're going to call it, when you're brought up in this kind of way of being in this foundation, like 12 steps, which is very awesome program, and actually saved my life early on for many reasons. But when you're brought up in this way of thinking, what happens is then it becomes almost like a religion or becomes the way rather
the only way.
And to go outside of that kind of line is risky or what have you. And so people are really looking at they see that some of this stuff is working and a lot of harm reduction modalities and pathways are working, but they're afraid to talk about it because of the stigma within certain kind of communities. And so just really honoring that it's not our life. If it doesn't work for us, that's okay. But whose life is it anyway?
Whose life is it anyway?
Whose life is it anyway?
Well, let's see if we could just maybe talk a little bit about the history of the harm reduction model.
Yeah.
I think these ideas first came around in the 1980s. And I think England probably was ahead of the curve on this, driven in part by their social healthcare model. So they really do pay a lot of attention to costs of care delivered and outcomes, compared to the model that we have here, which is a more fee-for-service. If you do something, you get paid for it. So not very preventive based, the model of care here in this fee-for-service world. But in the 1980s, with the advent of the HIV virus, it became certain that there were ways to prevent some of the adverse outcomes, some of the infectious diseases in particular that were associated with using needles in the setting of an HIV epidemic. And sometimes exchanging needles and providing safe, clean injection sites was better than providing nothing, providing no services.
Rampant spread.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think it grew out of that approach. This harm reduction model kind of exploded onto the scene with the HIV epidemic. And we've continued to try to refine it and deliver services with that approach.
Yeah.
And I would just like to say, maybe we can talk about what it is and what it isn't. It isn't. So I would say the idea of harm reduction is the idea of practical strategies and ideas that are meant to minimize the negative consequences of people's individual choices, whatever those choices might be. And it's built on a social justice framework, and it is built on a framework of mutual respect for people and their choices, for individuals and their choices. That said, what is it not? So harm reduction, it does not, and I think this is where a lot of the controversy gets started, but harm reduction is not an attempt to minimize or ignore the potential danger or harm associated with a certain behavior, including drug use. Okay, it is not that. It is not that we are saying that it's okay, that it's safe.
We're not saying go shoot some heroin. Right.
Yeah. Yes. We are saying once we provide resources for people and make their choices, make choices available to them, ultimately, whose life is it anyway?
Yeah.
Right? Who is going to decide what path they take? And it's just something that can't be dictated. It can't be dictated. People have autonomy. They have a right to choose, and
they will.
And they will. And that's right. And they
like
will.
it or not, they're going to choose regardless.
They will.
Yeah.
They will.
Well, so something that Angel just said, like, we're not telling them like go shoot heroin. We're saying maybe they shoot less heroin,
or maybe they shoot with a clean needle,
right? And so that's
minimizing
the part
the risk
I think
of
that's
hepatitis
confusing,
or HIV.
is that sometimes when I describe harm reduction, so harm reduction, I was going down the rabbit hole, of course, and it's like, what is harm reduction? Harm reduction refers to policies, programs, and practices that aim to minimize negative health, social, and legal impacts. So when you think about it like that, policies, programs, and practices. So all of it, like working it into all, policies, because, when I try to describe it to people and I say, okay, so is it better that I smoke a pack of cigarettes a day or if I smoke a half a pack of cigarettes a day? And they say a half a pack. And I go, great. So if I'm having, trouble with diabetes, is it better that I eat 12 Krispy Kreme donuts or 6 Krispy Kreme donuts?
Right.
Well, 6 Krispy Kreme donuts, right? It just seems so easy, when you put it like that. But for whatever reason, because of the fear, because of the stigma, all of the things. Now you say, okay, so what if I shoot, this much heroin and then I use less, and they go, well, yeah, because it's stressful and it scares people. And I understand that. And people are dying, and that's the facts. And so, we're not in any way saying that, we're promoting, use or any of the things. But what we're saying is to have policies, programs, and practices that appreciate withdrawal from, less than, to reduce harm. And that could look, a lot of different ways. It could be, addiction related. It could be, houselessness, sleeping in one particular part of town that might be less safe versus sleeping in another part of town. Maybe you're in the exact same tent, but now you're on the trail and you're not right downtown. Have we reduced harm? Yes, we have, So that's what I like about it, is that any reduction in my mind is a bonus.
Well, and then I also think about, absolutely. Yes. And I also think about, 20, well, let's see, it had to be 24 years ago, when I was living in transitional housing. My drug of choice, back on the streets, was methamphetamines. And I got into this treatment program, and then I left, completed that, and they put me in this transitional housing program with 3 other women. And one of the women that was living there went back out and started using. And I was worried about her. And because I didn't judge her, she felt safe enough to call me when she wanted to get back on track. And granted, I went against everything that they allowed as a resident in this household. Like, I was supposed to report, like if she called and wanted me to come pick her up, or if she this or that or the other. And at that time, what I felt called to do when she called me was go pick her up. And so I did that. I didn't wait. I didn't, and I'm not saying that this is really not risky for some people, but I knew where I was in my own journey, and I knew what I felt called to do. And when I went over there and picked her up, and this motel just had this guy crashed out, curtains closed, dope everywhere, and evidence that they had been using dope. There was no more dope. And when we left, she goes, I want to go to detox. And I'm like, awesome. She goes, but before I do, I need to go get a fix. And I was like, wow. Okay, what do you mean? And I was like, don't you know, we're out, but I really want to go to detox. But I don't think that if I go to detox right now that I will stay, because I think I'm too far withdrawing. And so I was like, okay, well, let's go. And I took her and got her, she went and got a small bag, and she did her fix right there. And it wasn't a lifestyle that I wasn't accustomed to, but it also wasn't my own drug of choice. So I felt I could sit there and allow this to happen in my vehicle, which I did. And then we went straight to Hooper Detox, and she stayed, and she got clean, and all of the things. But when I went back, because I was working like this real rigorously honest, way of being in the world, I told them at the housing program that I was at what I had done, and I got in trouble. And okay, so I suffered those consequences, whatever, but I stood firm in my belief system of that this was the right thing to do, because she was going to get high or go get loaded.
Well, she was going to leave your car, and then you wouldn't see her again.
And go get it anyway. So here I was the bridge, right? And people have given me so much flack over the years when I share that story, especially when I'm training individuals who are in recovery to support others. And people are like, you shouldn't be promoting. I'm like, do you, boo, right? And I'm not promoting anything. What I am saying is seize the opportunity, have an opportunity to think
Keep
differently, stay connected in some way. So with the policies, procedures, and practices, also your individual perspective, staying open to walk alongside someone.
Yeah. And what's right for you? Like, some people would not have been comfortable in their recovery to be able to do something like that. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And, obviously there were repercussions, with your agency, and I'm sure there would be at some point.
Yeah.
But I think that something we talk about often is how it's all about the connection. It's all about the relationship. And, in that moment, you recognize that she was saying, like, I want it, and I want it now, but I have this one thing that I have to do before I do, and you did what you needed to do in that moment to make sure that she saw detox.
And she could have easily went in, got her dope, and walked away and never talked to me again, and whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
But I
Her
planted
choice.
a seed, or I was part of that, whatever. So learn from it.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to comment on how that highlights some of the pillars of this harm reduction model.
Yeah.
One of them is that drug use is just not going anywhere.
It's not, right?
It's not.
It's not going anywhere.
Okay. There's no, we've seen the worst of that just say no model of managing these kinds of social issues that come up. Completely ineffectual. Then another is that we should take a non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services.
Huge.
Sort of what you did there.
Yeah.
You just have to hear what somebody thinks they need and try to help them get those needs met.
Imagine if there was a place right now that was a safe injection site, and somebody who was ready to go into detox but was going to be using whatever went in and went to the safe injection site, did their whatever size dose that they needed in a safe, supportive environment.
Something free of fentanyl and garbage that's made in a, bathtub.
Right.
Pretty
Something
much.
that might be medically pure, like they talk in Portugal, right? Rather than cut, because that's what's killing people mostly is the overcut of X, and then right from there had a doorway that they can go through, and go detox or something.
Yeah, we were actually just talking about that, in the car, because safe sites was one of the things that I was, looking at, and, they've got them in various countries, Portugal, Scotland, various, places. And that's my thought process, is that, if this is a person who needs to come there to get, what they need, you're going to see them often.
It's their medicine.
Yeah, you're going to see them every day. And then if you're, embedding trauma-aware practices within those clinics to where, those people understand the non-judgment, and trauma-aware approaches, then that is, constantly seeing that person. That's engagement every single day. That's developing a trust with an individual. And so when that person is ready, or even when they're just like contemplative and they're having, thoughts like, I slept outside last night and this happened and it was really uncomfortable. They're confiding in those people, and it's giving those people an opportunity to have just a little seed, plant that little seed right then.
Without pushing your agenda.
And then just enveloping them with services. Oh, you mentioned that. You know what? Let me hook you up with so-and-so, in room A or whatever, because she's a housing specialist, and this person over here might be able to help you with this. We've got a doctor who can talk about that, so that all of those services are completely embedded and, wrapped around an individual who is building a trusted relationship with somebody that they see daily. It just makes so much sense.
And have that connection and that lack of agenda pushing really supports,
non-coercive.
Yeah, the non-coercive.
Critical.
Get your values out of the way. Get your truth of what this should look like. And then they get to drive their menu. It's provide them the menu and let them drive.
Person driven. Yeah, absolutely.
And quit having people say, "Oh, they're just we're enabling them," or having people say, "Oh, they're just drug seeking." Well, fucking, of course they're drug seeking. They want to get their need met in that moment. But the more you say those words, the more they're going to be distrusting of you.
Why not look at the crisis as opportunity?
Yes.
To be able to develop a relationship with somebody who has probably closed off a lot of people, and now you have an in to be able to have tough conversations.
We see it all the time in the world of healthcare, because there is so much pressure to manage certain behavioral problems in a certain way, that people just don't come in. You see it all the time with people who smoke tobacco. They just like, oh gosh, I'm just not even going to go to the doctor's office for anything anymore, because they just don't stop harassing me about the smoking.
Or embarrassed.
Yes,
or
embarrassed.
Shameful.
Yes, of course. Yes, embarrassment and shame. And really, the approach should be that we want to see you more, not less,
Mhm.
but we have to make it appealing. We have to make it appealing. We have to make it so that they don't feel judged and coerced.
Yeah.
Just checking in with folks. Where are you?
Yeah.
Where are you with respect to this smoking?
Yeah.
They're like, man, I really like smoking. You're like, all right,
Next.
well, let's keep talking about it.
Yeah.
And if you ever want to if you want to make a change, we have tools.
We do have tools.
We could just talk about it. But also, sometimes it's appropriate to share information. I think people understand some of the risks of the behavior that they're engaging in. But I think it's important to be honest about those risks.
Maybe even approach
and
it in a way that
objective.
says, so, okay, cool. You want to keep smoking. Can we start planning for when your lungs start to deteriorate or when you start to struggle with your breathing or whatever those things are, and just normalizing it? Like, let's plan for that so you can be proactive around these certain things, even if you choose to continue to.
Totally.
I don't know. And it takes away the stigma, I think.
I like that. And I think that's one of the other pillars.
Wow, I haven't even read the directions. She didn't understand the assignment.
You got it. So the harm reduction approach seeks to empower the people who are coming to you for help, and recognizes that they are the primary agents of change. You can't make people do stuff.
Exactly.
It's just not going to work.
No, for sure.
How can we call that something else than change? Like that's an implication that they should be changing, right?
It's an adjustment
or shift
or
thrive. How about agents of thriving?
Change, but I feel like change is the only constancy. I mean, it's the only constant.
It's true.
It's the only constant.
Yeah. One of the things that I heard you say was just like the awareness of, that was another thing, through kind of just like all of my research, I've been working on harm reduction for a while. We all have, but the awareness of what's happening in that situation is one of like the top things, in the beginning of this process, is that making sure people are educated. There are things right now like fentanyl testing strips that can be used. So somebody could say like, look, I'm not done. Yeah, I'm not done. I want to keep using. But if they have fentanyl testing strips, then at least they can be testing what they're using, making an educated decision about what they're putting in their bodies, based on the levels. And so I think harm reduction is so broad, and I think that, when people think of harm reduction, they think of that, right? Like needles, clean needles, hepatitis C testing and medication-assisted treatment, is kind of like what it is. But it's a whole lot more than that, as well. It's reduction of use. It's making sure when you're talking about like policies and programs and practices, it's making sure that there's, some, I can't even think of the word other than, health literacy, basically, when you're putting out materials that, are spit in a way that people can understand, not everybody reads at a 12th grade reading level,
right?
So recognizing that, tapering, your materials, your education, your information to something that every person, can understand or most can understand.
And don't dumb it down everything either. That I don't like that word, but some people make the assumption that people who are in their use or using need, third grade reading, and
third grade is the national average.
Is it really?
Third grade reading level?
Wow.
Yeah, we try to publish medical materials for public consumption of the third grade.
Wow, that makes sense though. Well, and even things like using a 14-point font instead of a 12, for people who have different visual abilities, that in itself could change whether somebody chooses to read that pamphlet or not.
Totally would be me. I'd be like, what is happening? Right. How about, ordering a zillion, Narcan, life-saving shots, and take them to everybody on the streets that are say, hey, you guys want to learn how to use these? I just met a girl in IPS. They did that in Louisiana where she worked. That was one of the things that she felt called to do. And she ordered boxes and boxes of this and then went and people were like, what are you doing? It's like you're enabling them to use. No, it's a life-saving thing.
Saving them
and so
from
then
dying.
She was teaching this group of people in there who are actively users, how to use these, and then how to teach others to use them in their groups, in their communities.
Well, who's going to be there when somebody taps out?
Thank you.
Them.
They're the ones. We're not going to be there. We're not sitting in the houses hanging out.
There has been a very strong push to get the Narcan distributed
It's important.
to the
I'm on
communities.
several Facebook groups right now supporting that.
I mean, pharmacies are supposed to be letting people have it.
Let's just
I think
get
in some
shipments of that.
cases they are not letting people have it. I've had cases where even I write a prescription and then the person goes to pick it up and they will say that'll be $80.
Oh my god!
It's supposed to be free.
Wow.
It's supposed to be
No kidding.
And with the fentanyl, you want to have not just one dose, but 2 or 3.
A couple.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
One dose is often not enough. One dose of Narcan may
Doesn't
work
do it.
initially, but as more fentanyl rises in the system, they can go into overdose again.
Yeah.
I wonder, maybe that could be a call to action for the community members out who listen to our podcast. Like, how can you go and out into your community, get as many as you can and start, supporting that and be proactive and support that initiative, because there's so much, again, this tough love, just say no kind of mindset, old school mindsets that's saying that's enabling.
1 million overdose deaths in the last 12 months.
Oh my gosh, 1 million.
Well, and I just read something that says that we're dead last in the nation for opioid issues, and we're second in the nation, dead last for opioid treatment, second in the nation for opioid crisis.
When you say we, who are you talking about? Oregon?
Okay. Yeah, Oregon, dead last for treatment, which is so ridiculous because we all work in these worlds, right? So we know that there are things out there, but I was just processing that information last night. Like, why? Like, how could that even be that, we're like dead last for treatment when I know, I sit on boards where I watch the money being filtered to programs, but that's what it is that there's so many gaps.
I would need to suss that out a bit.
Yeah, I think we should look into it more because
because I think
outrageous.
I mean, there are states that don't have the widespread access to health care that have to be lower struggling more. I mean, than us. I don't want us to like
bash Oregon.
Yes, but I don't want to put I don't want to. I mean, we all need to do better because, like we just said, millions of people across the world are dying from this problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from this issue.
But I just feel like, if that is the case, then, it has to be gaps and barriers in services. It has to be navigation of services. It has to be lack of trauma awareness, which we know across the board. I've been working with thousands of, individuals one-on-one with addiction, over the last few years, through the medication-assisted treatment clinic, that I was working at. And I'm telling you, they hit just door after door after door. I mean, from, calling and never getting a call back, or, they call 6 days later and now they're not ready anymore. They were ready 6 days ago.
Yeah.
To wait lists, to barriers with their insurance being able to cover it.
Funneling money from the state to organizations that don't truly buy into that model of support.
Oh, we see
but
a lot of
say that they do, and use the right little buzzwords, but they really don't. They don't. They're just saying it enough to look good, but they're pushing a whole nother agenda.
You've hit on another pillar there, Fawn. It's the social determinants of health that affect a person's vulnerability and capacity to heal from drug-related harm.
Yeah.
There are some. It's very difficult if you don't have a phone.
Yeah.
Or
not everybody has Wi-Fi.
Yeah, right. You
not
don't
everybody
have
has
Wi-Fi.
a phone.
Get online and fill out this paperwork. How am I supposed to do that?
Yeah. And not everybody has the, the understanding to be able to even use those kind of things. My dad, he did 27 years in prison. He got out a couple of years ago and he's doing great. And it was kind of a running joke, but we handed him his first smartphone and, we're trying to FaceTime with him and see him. And, he's got it like this and we're looking straight up his nose, and he's frustrated and messing with buttons and hanging up, and when you think about that, for his age group specifically and anywhere around there, it probably is hard to navigate DocuSign, or some of these things that, kind of just go with the territory.
Oh, yeah. Very, very challenging. Yes. The technological gap. Yes. It's, for certain age groups, it's very challenging. Yeah.
Yeah.
I constantly look at my mom's forehead. She'll be 80 in April. I'm like, Mom, can we just move it down a little bit?
I need to see your face.
And then she'll move it the
Up.
phone down, and
Dude,
they're like, no, now
funny.
I see the ceiling, and then,
Yeah.
but and and she's worked on computers,
Yep.
over the last decade, and so she's got
Wow.
some sense of it, but
Everything has changed.
everything
a
changes
ton in a very
constantly.
short time
Yes.
frame.
God, I'm
Goodness.
lost. I've got a Note 9, and there's like a 12 now.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a struggle for some of
hilarious.
us.
What are
yes,
some of
for
the other
sure.
barriers that we can think of?
I mean, I think the being unhoused is a huge barrier.
Yeah.
With
Absolutely.
respect to
Housing
social
first, yo.
determinants. Yeah,
Housing first. We'll definitely be doing a podcast
Yeah.
regarding housing first, because I mean, how can you expect anybody to feel good about themselves in any way if, they have to wake up in a puddle, in the morning, and it's dark and it's cold and you can't sleep and you're worried about your safety? How can you expect anyone to be in a healing space,
Yes.
when their safety is compromised currently?
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about on that
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I wanted to bring up was medication-assisted treatment in the regard of addiction, Suboxone, Sublocade, buprenorphine. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. So again, there is some controversy around the use of medication-assisted therapy for people who are using particular substances. I think it comes up most commonly with the use of medication-assisted therapy like buprenorphine, also known as Suboxone, or methadone for people who are using illicit opiates, or opiates that have been prescribed by their doctor. Very, very common for that to go awry. It just depends on somebody's brain and other social determinants of health. And what was a prescription medicine now becomes a substance of abuse and dependence. So again, using that harm reduction approach, the idea is to minimize the risk of using illicit drugs by treating that opiate dependence with a prescribed medication. I think the controversy arises because the opioid dependence is still intact. For for people who are using MAT, they are dependent on the medicine. But we look at all the benefits of making that switch from an illicit drug, which could be anything from injecting IV, from going to unsafe places to get the medication, having to do unsafe things, or perhaps even participate in illegal activity to get that access to that substance, versus coming into a clinic where hopefully you're treated with respect and compassion, and people will hear your story and try to meet you where you are. And if that's where, my brain isn't ready, I'm not in a place where I can walk away from my opiate dependence, but I would like to stop using illicit drugs. I'm taking some big risks and I'm doing some things that I never thought I would do. And that's a pretty common story, actually. I don't think I've ever met somebody who said, I always wanted to be an addict when I grew up.
Absolutely.
And it does not discriminate. It comes to you from all walks of life, and it's a problem across the world. Yes, and so the controversy is, are you really just trading one opiate for another?
Well, and will you just kind of address, how that works with the dopamine and serotonin receptors and why buprenorphine works?
Yeah, so people have an opiate, they have an opiate dependence. That is, they just don't feel right unless they are able to maintain a certain level of that opiate in their system, because they go into withdrawal. Using some substances on a regular basis have a tendency to create a dependence. That is, it changes your brain in a way. In this case, with the opiates, it most commonly diminishes the dopamine receptors in a way that you need more and more and more in order to get the same effect. We call that the tolerance. And so people will develop a tolerance and they need more of the same medicine than they did when they first started. And so because the symptoms of the opiate withdrawal are just intolerable for people, it's very difficult to just stop. Again, everybody's different. Everybody's brain is different. Some people have an opiate and they're like, that's like garbage. I would never use that.
Yeah.
I'm never going to take it again. You know,
Totally.
Some people have an opiate, that very first dose, and they're like, this must be what it's like to feel normal. I will be taking this for the rest of my life and I'm going to feel normal. Of course, perhaps initially you might feel normal, but then comes the tolerance and comes the dependence and comes
having to do things that make you feel bad about yourself.
Yes.
Or that
The shame.
put you at risk of harm, harm from others, selling your body
Trauma.
to or trading your body for your next fix, where that might work in some cases, people trading each other, connection, whatever. But when you're doing something that goes against what you truly believe, and then you start doing more and more of this to get something that you need, that's where shame starts to kind of build up. And then that creates more barriers to reconnecting with others in your life.
And shame is trauma.
And shame is trauma. Shame will take a life of its own, Guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong, right? Kind of mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I just feel like, that's one of the things that, at least the systems everywhere, but that they really need to understand is that shame is trauma. When we talk about re-traumatization in the system, you treating someone terribly who is here to get help is traumatic. You are traumatizing people and you are detouring people from services. And so, why in a state like Oregon, where we have all these different treatment programs and possibilities, why aren't they getting utilized the way they need to? Because shame, working with those thousands of people over the last, few years, I can't tell you how many times they went into a program or tried to get into a program and had a horror story, came back and, somebody, maybe the person who did their assessment, was just neutral and, prescriptive, and they're asking them about traumatic events in their life. And this person's having a full trauma reaction in this moment, and nobody is doing anything about it.
Wow.
And so as you're, trying to navigate the system, think about that. If, you go to this door and you go to step through and the door slams you in the face and it hurts, you're not going to go to that door again. So you go to another door, slams you in the face and it hurts. You're not going to continue to go to these services because now you have a negative imprint for that service. That was something I really struggled with navigating people, because I'd say, oh, well, why don't you try this place? I've got 4 or 5 people who loved it. Nope. I will never go there again. I was there in 94.
Hear it all the time.
All the time.
All the time. And it's not just going in for treatment, but it's going in to get that abscess drained.
Yeah.
It's going in
to get a food box.
To get dental care. People just, eventually they just stop. They just stop going. And what a horrendous shame that is, to feel like you have nowhere to turn to get the help that you need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So I really am a fan of the MAT, of using the medication assisted therapy. I think it works differently for everybody. And in some cases, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term solution. But again, I think the key is harm reduction and talking to the person that that needs the help and figuring out what is the best strategy for them.
Yeah. Well, and healing. So that was another thing. So I didn't really understand MAT when I came into that world. I knew a few people who had used it, and so I knew a little bit, but, being in that system was really helpful, because what I didn't realize was that they're actually literally like filling those, whether it's an agonist or a partial agonist, they're filling those dopamine receptors,
So
in place
the partial
of
agonist the partial agonist will do that. Yes. The full agonists, for instance, methadone, it does
Not so much.
not. It continues that tolerance.
Cycle.
But again, it depends on the brain you have.
Yeah.
Some folks just don't do well on the bupe. I think neck and neck, with respect to the clinical evidence, the methadone as a full agonist and the buprenorphine as the partial agonist are really neck and neck with respect to outcomes,
Yeah.
which gives you some idea of just how darn challenging this,
Yeah.
the changing the behavior is.
Totally.
And then, as you've said, it is about surrounding them with services, because yes, we can treat the brain. We can treat the brain.
The brain will heal.
The brain will heal, but we have to address the behaviors. We have to help people address the behaviors.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes, like you were just saying a moment ago, that somebody walking through the store and the door slams in their face, right? Like if somebody's doing an assessment or doing an intake with somebody and you're spitting out all of these like very activated things to somebody who's extremely vulnerable in that moment, and their behavior starts to shift or change in that moment, now you're judging that there's some sort of problem they have, rather than going inward and going, I wonder if this just ignited something within them, that
what's wrong with
was
you
an activation
instead of what's happening.
And so people are coming from it from a perspective that there's something wrong with you. So I wish I had our board, because I would draw this kind of like what is really happening in the center here of this circle is I'm being activated. I've just been asked a zillion questions. I'm having flashbacks and my lid is starting to flip. But what the world is seeing is just on the outside of that circle. And the world is seeing, I've just got sweaty. I've just snapped at you.
No coping skills.
Yeah. And the world is seeing something on that layer. And then the further layer is society sees these as problems. And so we start conditioning our staff to think about what they're seeing rather than what might be happening underneath. And then they're, that's for a therapist or someone. No, actually, everybody in this society needs to start thinking about it from an internal process or an internal kind of the internal piece of quit looking about what's on the surface from a judgmental point of view, but seek to understand and explore meaning of what's happening, not what's wrong.
Yeah. Not what's wrong, but how did you get here?
Yeah. What's happened? Like I noticed this big shift. You were just, here, and now I'm seeing this, and I don't want to make any assumptions about it.
Yeah.
Right. And
very
just
well
naming
said.
it.
I like that, Angel.
Yeah, it's loving them through it.
Radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance.
Love it.
Yeah. Something else I just kind of wanted to address is I just highlighted this. Harm reduction approaches do not presume a specific outcome. Just to hammer that nail on the head
Stop with
again.
the outcomes.
Stop expecting an outcome and celebrate every little accomplishment along the way, whatever it is.
Wow, that is a very, very big stretch for us in the world of healthcare.
You're right.
Yeah, it is.
I'm just saying, yes, but I do think about it a lot.
Yeah.
And I talk about it every day. Yes,
totally.
It is,
and it comes from a good place, right? Like if you care about people, you don't want to see them hurt themselves, So I get why people get stuck outside that space, but once again, working with people who are, just entrenched in addiction, I was working over at OHSU Adventist and, watching people get their chest cracked open, because they were, having overdoses. But every one of those people continued to talk to me no matter what. There was never a time when it was like, you know what, Fawn, I just don't like you anymore. I don't want to deal with you anymore.
Right.
And it's like, why? Because I love them through it. I do not judge them when they make, little steps. And a lot of times they don't even recognize it's a little step. They're like, well, I did do this. I showered today. And I'm like, yes, help me shower. Good. And I'm sure it probably sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
Celebrating every step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. And recognizing that people did not arrive in these spaces overnight.
Yeah.
It is a very, very long journey. And it's a long road home. it's a long road home.
So I wonder if we can give our listeners something to practice or have some self-awareness around. And so if they haven't watched It's Not About the Nail 2-minute video on validation versus
We'll put a
problem
link in the
solving,
bottom of this.
Okay.
please watch this. And so in a nutshell, what it is it's happens to be heterosexual couple sitting on a couch, and she's got a nail in her head. And
he just wants to take it out.
And she's like complaining about her sweaters being snagged and her head and her aching and all of the things. And he's like, well, you do have a nail in your head. She's like, it's not about the fucking nail. She didn't say fucking, but I had to throw that in. Because, we all do that. And when we see a problem, we want to pull out the nail, right? We just want to fix it. It's obvious to us. But I think what society and our listeners need to be thinking about is, how is that nail helpful to her in that moment? So what he had to do is sit in his discomfort and try to connect with, wow, that must be really frustrating, and just validate
Support her no matter what.
Shut up and listen. And then, seek to understand that inner circle piece. If you're seeing on the outside the nail in your head, try to seek to understand, how is it helpful? What is happening? Why is it there? And why, if I pull that nail out because I think it's the solution, that could be actually keeping her from bleeding out. It could be the solution. The nail could be the solution in that time and place. And so when we're talking about individuals, utilizing substances that could be harmful, and then coming in and getting another form or support to harm reduce or what have you, that is the nail that people are focusing on, is the use. So how do we look at that nail in their head as the solution in the moment? Because maybe that's what's keeping them alive from a lot of trauma. Maybe they can't stop the thoughts from racing about something, and maybe that helps them kind of gear away from that. We don't know. Seek to understand and come from a place of curiosity rather than judgment and punitive, or coercive practices. So
well, and recognize that every single person is a unique individual who has different needs, different barriers, different story, different lens,
brain, different experiences,
different chemistry.
So when we say person-centered care, I don't love it.
Right.
I want person-driven care. Person-centered says, okay, you're the center. We're all, going to do this.
And we're going to still give you all these things for you to do.
Yeah. But person-driven is they're driving their own ship.
Here you're in the center. And here's all the menus. But you get to decide.
You get to decide.
You get to decide for you.
It's your
power.
power.
Worked for you in the past.
Yeah. Well, and then, incorporating the 8 dimensions of wellness. We talk about the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration all the time, because they have really good information regarding all of these things, as well as the 8 dimensions of wellness, recognizing that there's all these different pieces of us. There's our physical piece, and there's our, social piece, and our
spiritual
environmental piece. And, recognizing that if any of those things are in deficit, it's hard. You're going to have, some adjustment.
And if they're all in a really rough place, deficit, a lot of times people want to focus on it's because you're using drugs. And actually, no, sometimes that's the case. And sometimes it's, I'm using drugs because I've lost hope because all this shit is
because everything feels terrible.
And I can't juggle this anymore. I can't get anything up to, past baseline, right? Or even to baseline.
Yeah.
It's interesting how our some of the really well-intended things that have gone out there, like DARE, like Just Say No. I believe that these mindsets and these messages were really well-intended in a lot of ways to help people kind of find some tools or whatever, or just say no. Okay, right? I think they also played a huge part in people feeling stuck, shame, and because I couldn't just say no. And it's I must be broken.
Well, and it's
because
that herd
I can't
mentality,
say no.
right?
Yeah.
Everybody else can handle it. Everybody else can, dabble. Everybody else can drink on a weekend. Everybody else, but not me. It's one more thing that sets us back aside from everybody else and makes us feel different and makes us feel wrong. And I think what's important is difference not bad, difference great.
Just explore other possibilities.
Other possibilities. Maybe that's not your crew too. You know what I mean? if you don't feel good about it, then that's not your crew.
Right.
So no, I think it's important. I think creating safety is important. 100% creating safety, physical, emotional, period. And that's where I think that trauma awareness comes into the place, is that if they don't feel safe emotionally to receive services, they're not going to.
Yeah. Yes.
And then physical safety in the regard of, if you're actively being traumatized, it's pretty hard to work on just about anything.
Oh my gosh. And that active traumatization could be in all areas of your life, and people are only seeing it from one perspective. Maybe I walked into the clinical, what have you, and I've just gotten traumatized by them, but they're not even realizing that they traumatized me, because they don't come into the light of work because they don't care about people, but they don't know because they're not aware of their own stuff, and to have an external practice. And then they're not thinking about, oh, actually, when I leave here, I'm getting it at home too. Right. Or I'm getting it on the bus when I'm rolling out of here, because I'm 30 pounds, and people look at me and I'm filthy and blah, blah, blah. Right. Because I have it in every area of my life. People need to heal around what brings them to a place of hope, not hopelessness and despair. And we shouldn't be adding to their hopelessness and despair.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we say in one of the trainings that we do is, we don't know where anybody slept the night before. And we talk about, you're in a hurry, it's in the morning, you're on your way to work, and, you got out the door late, and you go into the store to buy something, and the cashier starts fumbling over your change, and you're frustrated, and you're like, come on now. Like, I am in a hurry, but you don't know where she slept last night. You don't know, if she was physically abused. You have no idea. And so stop taking it personal, for starters. Not everything's about you, and have just a little bit more compassion for humans, because we're all going through some stuff right now. And so I think it's really important to recognize what's stirring in us, and why it's stirring, and why we're taking it personal, so that we're not re-traumatizing people.
Right.
Just got my license, and I was not recently, it was like 25 years ago, but
you got your permit?
I got my permit. I understood the assignment.
Woo-hoo, let's go for a ride.
No, I think about what you just said. I think it's really important for us to also name, like, we're not trying to judge those who are being assholes to other people, right? Like, and
they don't know they're
sounds
doing
very
it.
judgmental, right? And the key is to go inward and ask ourselves, like, why am I feeling this way? And the reason why I brought up my driver's license, because growing up, I'm in a car with family members, and they were constantly, like, road rage, yelling at people. And so as I became a driver, I started to notice that I'd be looking in my rearview mirror at a stop sign and feeling anxious or fear that if I don't step on the gas fast enough, that the people behind me are going to honk or yell or whatever. And so I had to do a lot of internal self-talk, like, I'm okay. It doesn't matter if they're angry, little things like that. And started to have to change the way I thought, which changed the way I felt, which changes my own attitude and my own actions. And so then I'd be driving with my ex or whatever. And then I'm like, you're messing with the serenity in this car right now.
Our vibe
because
right now.
You're yelling at somebody who can't hear you. You're yelling at somebody who you don't know if their kid just got harmed. You don't know why they're just,
you don't know how old they are
or didn't do the license,
Totally.
Exactly. And so then he'd be like, and I'm like, ew, this is energy that I don't want to be around. But name it, right? Name it, like, hey, it's not about what's out there right now. It's about, why is this affecting you so badly? And maybe we're going through a hard time. Maybe the person that's waiting around the cashier is going through a really hard time. And everybody else is seeing them as this jerk or this asshole.
Somebody flipping out.
But the reality is, well, what just happened for them, right? And help people do that internal process. We've got probably about 5 more minutes or so.
Well, so how can we help?
What do you think? Yeah, how can we?
How can Aware help?
How can Aware help? Well, I mean, come on, we're aware. No, okay. Well, we can answer questions, we can offer support, we can offer trainings, policies, procedures, practices, those sorts of things.
And I think central to this harm reduction approach that we've been speaking about is including people with a history of
Absolutely.
these
In
behaviors
design of services.
in design and delivery of services
Yeah.
and in policies at the governmental level.
Mhm.
These
without
are
tokenizing,
these are right
because
these,
they say they do that now.
yeah.
Some people are like,
Yes.
oh, we really
And
don't
there's
want
like
that
two.
voice, but there's two. And
well, it's clear that it's not happening now because of the way we're headed.
Yeah.
You know, so it just makes me even more excited to be on this team and think more about all of the work that we have to do.
Yeah. Well, I think that is how we can help, right? I mean, like we deliver trauma aware trainings,
Yeah.
to organizations. So we're working within systems to try to improve trauma awareness, across the board. We also have a really high focus on peer delivered services. We train peers. We do career path work, with peers
to keep them from being co-opted to end up being the tokenized peer to just go along with the norm, right? That's why part of it's failing, right?
Totally. Yeah. And peer support is huge. It's important. And it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because I think they are really realizing that it's important to have the voices of people using those services in the system design.
Yeah.
But right now, I think it is very tokenized. I think it's got a lot of ways to go. And the systems that are employing those peers really need to know what it's like to actually integrate services in a development, capacity versus just creating a program and, calling it good.
Well, and providing a platform for the people in these roles to protect the fidelity of the peer and mentor role from the grassroots perspective and not creating more of the same. So creating departments or pathways for them to grow and be mentored by their leaders within that growth, right? And so I think that that's a big part of some of these state committees. When I sit on them, I'm like, who is this peer? Like, they're brand new to the understanding of what even peer is, and then that's beautiful that they want to get back and be involved. So how can I, as somebody who's been doing this for 25 years, mentor this one individual? Well, we are only so many people, right? So how do we kind of create a packaging of mentorship to make sure that they're falling in the grassroots kind of way? Another thing that I think that we could be doing is obviously we're going to have our online curriculums outside of peer delivered services, but just in general about trauma awareness and really helping society, individuals across sectors, across businesses, just the general population and beyond, to start to go inward and learn on how to keep calm and connect, like how to keep calm when you're activated or when somebody's activated. Go internal, be aware of your own trauma awareness, and then have an external practice. And so, there's just such a lack of that practical application on how to support somebody and stay connected when we're activated or we have some sort of turmoil going on. So I think that's going to be a big piece, and we want to support others who are doing great things.
Absolutely.
So if you have something that you're doing in society or in your community or in your organization that is truly like out of the box, doing something that is really showing something amazing, please let us know, because we want to lift up other organizations, not just be, it's not all about just aware, though we want to be a hub to support others doing amazing work. So
yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
important. Yeah.
Well, I sure do appreciate you guys, honestly. Like, I think just everything that we're doing is important work, and just the spreading awareness of these things alone, I think is super important, because too many times people ask me questions and I think this person works in a system that they should know these things, but they didn't want to ask. They didn't feel comfortable to ask somebody.
Or it wasn't offered.
The training wasn't available. So
Even system administrators, I'm like, how do you not know this? And well, people get, without shame, people get on kind of this robotic way of being because they come into this line of work. They're really excited. They want to do great stuff. They want to help a lot of people. And then systemically things are roadblocks in their way and their fire kind of goes away. And then they lose hope to try to do anything different because
seems like too big.
It's too big. They can't get enough people rallied behind the idea or whatnot. So absolutely. So next week, first, thank you for spending time with us. I have to put on my glasses again. Please join us again next week when our topic is going to be on housing first models.
Where can they find us, Angel?
Yeah, y'all can find us on our website at the link below. And you can also find us on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. What else are we?
YouTube.
Hey, that's where these are going to be, right? So we'll see you next time. And
thank you, TalkCast PDX.
Oh yeah. Thank you, TalkCast PDX and Dave Dahl and Justin over there. Kind of a badass. And lastly, what can you do to support harm reduction? And what can you do to stay aware? See you next week.
Bye.